Good morning, Magic. I'm Gavin Verhey from Wizards of the Coast. And today, I want to talk to you a bit about good old First Strike. You know, that mechanic that originally appeared in Alpha, and our changing philosophies around it. You've attacked with them, you've blocked with them, but what does the future hold for creatures with First Strike? Let's get started. Flying, trample, protection, and of course, First Strike. Mechanics that have been around for 30 years since the very first set. Flying and trample have more or less stayed the same and plentiful in the game. Protection, on the other hand, has ebbed and flowed. It's been in and out of the game at various points, and where we've essentially settled is small amounts of protection here and there is alright. If you're curious for more on this, you can hear more about all these mechanics in my video, Alpha Mechanics, Where Are They Now? It's a nice window into just how much has changed. But anyway, what about First Strike? How many commons in Magic do you think have natural First Strike? As in just the keyword, no restrictions. Flying has about 746 creatures. Makes sense for what I'd call Magic's best keyword. Trample has a respectable 148. It might surprise you to learn that First Strike only has 89 tournament legal commons in Magic. Why is that? First Strike has been around a long time, but it has a major design challenge: blocking. The mechanic sounds like it would be ideal for attacking, but First Strike is usually stronger defensively than offensively. On the attack, your opponent can take the damage or throw whatever they choose in front of it, but on defense, a single First Strike creature can hold off a bunch of your opponent's creatures. Take Youthful Knight, for example. If your opponent has 3/2s and you have Youthful Knight, your knight can hold them all off, let alone if you have 2 Youthful Knights. Now you hold off everything with 4 toughness too. As a result, historically, especially at common for limited, we've been very careful about large First Strikers. They hold off your opponent's board so well. Of those 89 commons, only 21 of them have 3 or greater power. And many of them sport low toughness, so you can kill them off by blocking with a couple creatures or just any piddly removal spell. You'll find more at uncommon, sure, but it's something we are careful about. It can be interesting as a tool, especially for defensive decks, but if deployed without care from design, it can result in board stalls, as nobody attacks, and that can be frustrating to play against. So, how do we solve for this gameplay issue? Sometimes we've done activated First Strike, like on Moorland Inquisitor and one of my faves, Unyielding Krumar, as a way to make you at least have to commit mana to it. These kind of cards do something very subtle. It is a real 4D chess game design moment. While attacking on your turn, it essentially functionally has First Strike. All your mana is untapped as you attack, and it's very unlikely your opponent is going to block your First Striker with a creature that will die to it if you pay the mana. So they don't block. But because they don't block, your mana is still untapped. Essentially, you get the benefit of First Strike for no actual cost. But then, to block and use First Strike on your opponent's turn, you do have to leave mana up and not use it on your turn, which is a real cost to use the defensive mode on the card. Kind of clever, right? However, what this really boils down to once again is this. First Strike is often most fun when it's only while you're attacking. We've done this in a few different ways. One is with abilities that trigger to somehow grant it, which are usually going to happen just on your turn. Bloodhaze Wolverine and Belligerent Whiptail are good examples of this. You can trigger them off turn sometimes, but only as a trick. Normally, they're active just on your turn. But there's something else you've been seeing more of recently. Just straight up First Strike only on your turn. It's been around here and there a while. I mean, Mirage had Parage of Urborg, for example, but you've really seen it accelerate since Guilds of Ravnica. Fresh-faced recruit in guilds, into Pouncing Lynx, On-Crop Invader, and Nahiri, Storm of Stone in War of the Spark, really brought this back full force. We've seen it show up more since then in both that form and also creatures that get First Strike as long as they're attacking, like Blood Petal Celebrant. Fun little nitty-gritty design fact here. After some conversations, we've generally settled on the Pouncing Lynx wording over the Blood Petal Celebrant wording, going forward for consistency. While I'm not an editor, I believe I know at least 2 factors that are in play here. For one, for any future cards we could make that care about first strike, it's active during all of your turn. Imagine Ram Through, but for caring about first strike instead of trample. But also, for playing on Magic the Gathering Arena, it makes more sense as you're looking at symbols on your creatures and selecting attacks. At a glance, you might not notice that something has first strike if it only gains it while attacking, because the symbol that indicates first strike won't appear until it's too late. A little templating trivia for you there. This brings us up to Phyrexia All Will Be One, where you'll see this trend continue with Duelist of Deep Faith and Hex Gold Halberd, both granting first strike only on your turn. We've been using this more and more. The biggest downside is the extra text on the card. As opposed to just writing first strike as a keyword on the card, it takes 7 more words plus the card's name to fill it all out. And even though a card like the Duelist or Blood Petal Celebrant is pretty straightforward, they both look like they have a lot going on as a result. So this begs the big question. Since first strike on your turn is generally what we prefer, are we just going to change first strike to be that? Well, if I was reinventing Magic from the ground up, I'd absolutely push for this. I think it would generally play better, and I'd rather have on your turn be the default and then write out any exceptions each time. The biggest blow here is probably to combat tricks, which I do really like granting first strike on, but we could probably make that work out okay. However, Magic is a game with 30 years of history, and changing a mechanic that ingrained in the game is a huge change. It would change how hundreds of cards function in a tremendous way. It's not something that matches how we treat our cards and mechanics, and certainly not something to do lightly. I also don't want to dismiss the relevance it can have in Constructed. A Baneslayer Angel holding back opposing creatures, or an untapped Alesha in Commander being what stops you from getting attacked, is quite meaningful. We don't want to just strip that functionality away. So no, not right now. What about a new mechanic entirely though? That's something I could maybe see. The name First Strike is just so good though. What does it do? It strikes first. But if we really use it in large quantities, it's something we'd consider. Though I still would say the odds are against it. Despite its problems, First Strike isn't going anywhere, and you'll still see it with no restrictions. Phyrexia All Will Be One is a great example. 3 rares have straight up first strike, and then the uncommon and common permanents have it only during your turn, with 1 trick aura that can grant it. You'll continue to see plenty of rares, uncommons, and some commons with it. I'll even let you in on the groundbreaking, huge spoiler that March of the Machine has a common creature with regular first strike. I know. Wow. But don't be surprised if you see more of first strike on your turn or triggered first strike in the future. And for all you fans of double strike, yes, double strikers could also work this way. Though that is a bit trickier because often we treat them as double their printed power, which is really a big difference to not work on your opponent's turn. But I'm really curious, what do you think? Would you change how first strike works? Make up a new keyword? Or maybe you don't see a problem here at all? Please let me know what you think in the comments down below. I'd love to hear from you. I'll talk with you again soon. And until then, may you strike first. You got this. Mastercore and Morphling became the pinnacle of what creatures were at the time. Morphling as the iconic unkillable blue finisher, like in Mark Lepine's mono blue control deck, which has a full creature lineup of 4 Ophidians to draw cards, 4 Sea Sprites main deck, 4 Mishra's Factory from the land row, and then 2